My husband divorced me by text message and emptied our joint account. He had no idea what was coming. The text came in at 11:47 on a Tuesday night. I had just finished reviewing the monthly accounts for my catering business, cross-checking invoices against supplier payments, the kind of quiet, careful work I had always done best. My phone lit up on the kitchen counter, and I almost ignored it. I was tired, and the column of numbers in front of me needed one final check before I could sleep. But something made me reach for it. Maybe it was the same quiet instinct that had been whispering to me for 9 weeks. The low, steady hum of a woman who already knows something she has not yet been told out loud. The message was short. It said, "Claire, I want a divorce. I've already moved money from our joint account. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Tanya and I are moving forward. You'll be fine." I read it twice, slowly. Then I set the phone face down on the counter, picked up my pen, and went back to my accounts. My hand was completely steady. My heart was not racing. I was not shocked. I was not afraid. Because the truth was, I had been expecting this moment for exactly 9 weeks. And I had spent every single one of those weeks making sure I was ready for it. My name is Claire Westbrook. I am 52 years old, and I built my catering business, Westbrook Kitchen, from a single borrowed oven in my sister Nora's garage 14 years ago. Today it serves corporate events, private dinners, product launches, and weddings across the city. I have a team of 11 staff, a commercial kitchen I own outright, and a client list that took years of early mornings and late nights to build. My husband of 23 years, Patrick, had always called it my little side project. He said it with an easy smile, the kind of smile that sits on the surface of a face without going any deeper. Patrick was a senior procurement manager at Harlow Industries. He earned a comfortable salary, wore expensive watches on the weekends, and believed, with the calm certainty of a man who had never been seriously challenged, that he was the financial backbone of our marriage and our life. He was wrong. He had been wrong for a very long time. But I had never once corrected him, because I had learned early on that the most powerful position in any negotiation is the one where the other person has no idea you are negotiating at all. I first noticed something was wrong 9 weeks before that text message. Documents folder documents folder arrived. It was a Thursday afternoon, and I had logged into our joint bank account to set up a transfer for a regular supplier payment. The balance on the screen was lower than it should have been. Not dramatically lower, the way it would look if someone had cleaned it out overnight, but lower in the careful, deliberate way of someone who was hoping not to be noticed. I had managed our household finances for most of our marriage, not because Patrick had asked me to, but because he had no patience for the details. Numbers bored him unless they were attached to his own salary. I printed the transaction history and sat with it at the kitchen table. 4 transfers over the previous 6 weeks, each one for a tidy sum, each one moving money to an account number I had never seen before. Together, they added up to $18,400. I folded the paper. I put it in the folder I kept in my home office. I did not say a word to Patrick that evening. The following morning I called my lawyer, Paula Hendricks, who had been recommended to me by a friend who had survived her own difficult divorce 3 years earlier. Paula told me to keep watching and to keep records of everything. That was all I needed to hear. Paula was direct from the very first meeting, the kind of direct that feels like clean air after a long time in a stuffy room. She sat across from me with a notepad and a calm, precise expression, and she asked me everything. She asked about our shared assets, the house, the accounts, the vehicles, the savings. She asked about the structure of my catering business, whether it had been registered separately from our marital estate. I told her yes. I had incorporated Westbrook Kitchen as its own legal entity 8 years ago, on the clear advice of my accountant, a steady, careful woman named Fran, who'd been doing my books since the very beginning. Patrick had complained about the incorporation paperwork at the time. He said I was overcomplicating a simple hobby. He had used that word, hobby, and I remembered the way it had landed, flat and dismissive, like a hand waving something small away. That decision, made on an ordinary Saturday morning 8 years ago, had now become one of the most consequential things I had ever done for my own future. Paula looked at her notes, looked up at me, and said, "That changes the whole picture." I drove home feeling something I had not felt in a long time. I felt like I was standing on solid ground. Over the weeks that followed, I began to see things I had previously allowed myself to explain away. Patrick was on his phone constantly, but he always tilted the screen slightly away from me when I walked past. He had started going to the gym 3 evenings a week, which might have seemed like a positive thing, except that in 23 years of marriage, he had never once expressed interest in a gym. He came home on those evenings smelling faintly different. Not of sweat, but of something careful and deliberate. He bought new shirts in colors he had never worn before. He started arriving home late on Friday nights with the same loose explanation about end-of-week work drinks. I did not ask questions. I did not make accusations. I went quietly about my days, and I built my case the way I had always built my business, methodically, patiently, one piece at a time. I kept a small notebook in the glove compartment of my car, and I wrote down dates, times, and details. I photographed credit card statements that arrived in the post before Patrick could collect the mail. Paula had told me that documentation was my most powerful tool. I treated gathering it like a second job, because that is exactly what it was. Tanya was 29 years old. She worked in the marketing department at Harlow Industries, and I had met her once, at the company Christmas party 2 years earlier. She had shaken my hand with a bright, easy smile and told me it was lovely to meet me. She had laughed a little too loudly at Patrick's jokes that evening and stood a little too close to him when the room was full of other people to stand near. At the time, I had told myself it meant nothing. People at parties stand close to the people they know. Looking back now, I understood that I had noticed and quietly tucked the noticing away. The way you sometimes know something before you are willing to know it. I did not waste much energy on anger toward Tanya. She had not made promises to me. She had not stood in a church and spoken vows in front of both our families. Patrick had done all of those things. He was the one who had decided, somewhere along the way, that those promises had a shelf life. I saved my energy for what actually mattered, which was making sure that when this fell apart, it fell apart entirely on his side and not mine. 6 weeks into my quiet investigation, I found the apartment. Patrick had signed a lease on a 2-bedroom unit in Riverside, a neighborhood about 20 minutes from our home. I found out through the most ordinary of accidents. A leasing agency sent a confirmation letter to our home address, apparently because Patrick had listed it on the application as his current address, and the automatic mailing system sent a copy there out of routine. I collected the post that morning before Patrick left for work. I opened the envelope at the kitchen table while he was in the shower. I read every page carefully. Then I took clear photographs of all 4 pages on my phone. I refolded the letter, slid it back into the envelope, and left it on the counter where Patrick found it when he came downstairs. He picked it up, scanned it, and told me without quite meeting my eyes that it had been sent by mistake, that he had looked at the apartment for a colleague who was relocating. I said that made sense. I offered to make him another coffee. Inside my phone, sitting quietly in a locked folder, were photographs every page of that lease. Patrick's name appeared on it, alongside Tanya's. The move-in date was 5 weeks away. I met with Paula again the following week, and I spread everything I had gathered across her desk. The printed bank transfer records showing $37,000 moved in total over 9 weeks. The credit card statements with hotel charges, restaurant bills, and a receipt from a jewelry store I had never been taken to. The photographs of the lease agreement. The detailed timeline I had kept in my notebook. Paula went through all of it carefully, page by page, without rushing. Then she set it down and looked at me across the desk. She said, "Claire, you have built a very solid case." She walked me through what the financial picture looked like for the divorce settlement. Our home was jointly owned. Our joint savings had been largely drained by Patrick's transfers. But Westbrook Kitchen was entirely mine, protected by 8 years of clean and separate financial records that showed, without any room for argument, that not a single dollar of marital money had ever been used to run or grow the business. Patrick had no claim to it. None at all. Paula said she would begin preparing the filing immediately. I walked out of her office into a gray afternoon, and I breathed the cold air and felt the particular calm of a person who has done everything they could do. There was one more practical matter I needed to handle before Patrick made his move. When I had first discovered the transfers, our joint account had held just over $41,000 in savings. By the time Patrick sent his text message, he had moved $37,000 of it into his undisclosed account, withdrawing it in careful increments that he probably believed were small enough not to alarm me. What he did not know was that 2 weeks before that text arrived, I had transferred my share of the remaining balance, just under $2,000, into my own personal account. Not to hide it. Paula had advised me clearly that protecting marital funds being actively drained by one spouse was both legally sound and entirely appropriate. I had documented every single transfer Patrick had made, with dates, amounts, and the receiving account number. Paula had already filed for an emergency motion to freeze the account he had been moving money into. By the time he sent that text message at 11:47 on a Tuesday night, believing he had left me with nothing, the account he was counting on was already frozen. He had handed me the winning cards and called it a victory. I did not reply to his text message that night. I made myself a cup of tea, sat at the kitchen table for a long while, and then went to bed. I slept better than I had in months. The following morning I called Paula at 9 o'clock. She told me the emergency motion had been confirmed and the account was frozen. She told me the divorce papers would be served to Patrick within 48 hours. I thanked her, and then I called Nora. My sister had known for 3 weeks because there had been a point when I needed to say the truth out loud to someone who loved me. Nora said, "I've been waiting for this call." She came over that evening with a bottle of good wine, and we sat in the kitchen of the house I had lived in for 16 years. I let myself feel, just for that one evening, the full weight of 23 years coming to an end. The sadness was real. The relief was just as real. I cried a little, and Nora held my hand and did not say anything unnecessary. The next morning I got up, went to the kitchen, and went back to work. That was what I had always done. That was what I would keep doing. Patrick's first call came the following morning at 7:15. I was already at the Westbrook commercial kitchen, checking prep work for a corporate luncheon we were delivering that afternoon. I let the call go to voicemail. His message was confused more than angry, the voice of someone who had woken up to find the game board had been rearranged while he slept. He said there seemed to be some kind of issue with one of his accounts. He said he thought we should talk before things got complicated. He said he knew his text message had been abrupt, but that he had not expected things to move quite this quickly. I found that last part interesting. He had been planning this for months. He had signed a lease with another woman. He had moved nearly $40,000. He had sent a text message at midnight, dissolving a 23-year marriage, and yet he had not expected things to move quickly. He had expected, I realized, that I would be too stunned and too lost to do anything at all. I sent him a single text message in reply. It said, "Please direct all communication to my lawyer. Her details are below." Then I went back to checking the prep list with Bev, and we got on with the day. He came to the house that evening. I heard his car pull into the driveway, and I stayed where I was in the kitchen, finishing the last of my tea. He had his key, but I had spoken to a locksmith that afternoon, and the locks had been changed. He tried the key twice. Then he knocked. I did not go to the door. He called my phone 4 times in a row. I watched it ring from where I sat across the room, and I let it ring. He called Nora next, who picked up and told him she had nothing to say to him. He called our mutual friend Patricia, who said the same thing with considerably less patience. Patrick stood on the front step for just over 10 minutes. I know because I watched from the upstairs landing, standing back from the window so he could not see me. He tried the key one more time, then stood very still for a moment, then walked back to his car. He sat there for another few minutes before he drove away. I went back downstairs and washed my mug and put it away. I did not feel triumphant. I did not feel sad either. I felt the particular steadiness of someone who has prepared well. 2 days after he was served with the papers, Patrick's tone shifted completely. The confusion gave way to anger, hot and fast the way his anger had always come. He sent a string of messages directly to my phone, ignoring my clear instruction to communicate through our lawyers. He said I was being vindictive and calculated. He said the money transfers were not illegal because the joint account belonged to both of us, and he had every right to access it. He said that Westbrook Kitchen had grown during our marriage, and he intended to make a legal claim on it. He said he had supported this family for 23 years and he would not be punished for wanting a different life. Each message was angrier than the one before. I read each one carefully, took a screenshot, and forwarded it to Paula with a short note. Paula's reply came within the hour. It said, "He keeps improving our case. Please encourage him to continue." I almost laughed. Patrick had always believed that confidence and volume were enough to carry any argument. He had never once understood that I had been watching and recording and building for 9 weeks, and that every single message he sent was one more thing the court would eventually read. While all of this was unfolding, I kept running my business. There was a Saturday wedding that required 2 days of prep and a full team on site. There was a product launch dinner for a new client who had come through a referral. There was a charity gala at the end of the month that I had been planning for 6 weeks. My work did not stop because my marriage was ending, and I did not want it to stop. Westbrook Kitchen had always been the thing that belonged entirely to me, the place where I was wholly myself, where my decisions mattered, and my effort produced results I could see and measure. I held on to it now the way you hold on to something solid when the ground around you is shifting. My staff knew something was different. I was quieter than usual in the mornings, and I moved through the kitchen with a kind of focused inward attention. Nobody asked directly. My operations manager, Bev, who had worked with me for 6 steady years, simply started leaving a fresh cup of tea on my desk each morning without being asked or acknowledged. Those small acts of quiet care are the ones you remember long after everything else has settled. Nora called me 10 days before the hearing with news she had gathered carefully. She had stayed in contact over the years with Patrick's younger brother, Alan, a decent man who had always been separate from Patrick's worst qualities. Alan had called her. He said he was sorry about what was happening and that he had only recently learned the full picture of how things had gone. He told Nora that Patrick had been presenting the situation to the family as a mutual growing apart, a sad but inevitable thing, with the strong suggestion that my focus on the business had left him lonely and disconnected. Alan said he had believed that version until he started asking questions that Patrick could not answer cleanly. He said he had then found out about the money. He had found out about Tanya. He had found out about the lease that had been signed months before Patrick sent that text message. Nora said the line went very quiet after that. Then Alan said he was sorry. He said he would not be lending his support to Patrick's version of events. The careful story Patrick had been telling began to come apart at the edges, one conversation at a time, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The week before the hearing, Patrick made one final attempt through his lawyer. The proposal that came through was almost startling in how much it revealed about what he had been expecting from me. He suggested we split the remaining joint account balance and the house equity down the middle, that I keep Westbrook Kitchen with no further claims against it, and that we agree to a clean and private separation. Paula read the terms to me over the phone. I asked her what she thought. She said, "I think he has spoken to someone who told him what a judge is likely to say about systematic account transfers made during an undisclosed affair." We declined. I had not spent 9 weeks building documentation and protecting my position so that Patrick could quietly settle his way out of accountability. The court was going to hear everything. Every transfer date, every hotel receipt, every message he had sent to my phone after being told to go through our lawyers. Every piece of paper I had quietly collected and filed away while he had been busy planning a different life. The morning of the hearing, I dressed with care. I wore the dark charcoal blazer I kept for important client presentations and the simple pearl earrings my mother had given me on my 40th birthday. I arrived at the courthouse 12 minutes early. Paula was already there, standing in the corridor outside the courtroom with her files under her arm, looking entirely comfortable, the way people look in places they know well. She looked me over and said, "You look exactly right." I said, "I just wanted it to be finished." She said those two things were not in conflict. Patrick arrived 7 minutes before the hearing began. He was with his lawyer, a man named Garrett, who had a reputation for sharp negotiation in business disputes, which suggested Patrick had not done enough research into what family court actually required. Patrick looked across the corridor at me when he came in. I met his eyes and gave him a single nod. He looked away first. He had expected, I think, to find someone diminished, someone pale and anxious and gripping her bag too hard. Instead, he found me standing in a courthouse corridor, speaking quietly to my lawyer, as composed as if I were checking over an event brief before a catering job. The hearing was efficient and thorough. Paula presented the documented transfers, $37,000 in total, moved from the joint account to an undisclosed personal account over a 9-week period. She presented the transaction records with dates, the lease agreement photographs, the credit card statements showing expenditure consistent with a separate ongoing relationship, and the series of text messages Patrick had sent directly to my phone after being instructed to communicate through legal counsel. The judge, a composed woman in her 60s with reading glasses on a thin chain, reviewed each piece of documentation carefully and without visible reaction. Patrick's lawyer argued that access to a joint account was a legal right of both account holders. The judge looked at him for a long, even moment. Then she said that the systematic withdrawal of the majority of a joint account, conducted during an undisclosed affair and in preparation for a separation that had not yet been disclosed to the other spouse, was a matter the court treated with considerable seriousness. She ordered the frozen account held as part of the joint estate pending full settlement. Across the room, Patrick's face went a color I had never seen on him before. Outside in the corridor afterward, Patrick came toward me before I could reach the exit. His lawyer was a few steps behind. Patrick said, "Claire, I never meant for it to go this far." I stopped walking. I turned and looked at him properly, the way you look at someone when you are not trying to manage the moment or smooth anything over. This man I had shared a home and a bed and 23 years of ordinary life with. The man who had been held up through 2 job losses and a frightening health scare, and the long grief after his father died, by the calm steadiness of the life we had built together. I looked at him and I said, "You chose every step of how it went, Patrick. Every single one." His mouth opened slightly and then closed. Garrett put a quiet hand on Patrick's arm. I turned and walked toward the exit with Paula beside me. I did not slow down, and I did not look back. Some moments do not need a final word from both sides. The work had already spoken for itself, and there was nothing left to add. The full settlement took another 6 weeks to reach its conclusion. The financial picture was clear, given the evidence on the table. Our marital home would be sold and the equity divided, but Patrick's share was reduced significantly by the court's treatment of the dissipated funds. The $37,000 he had moved from the joint account was counted as his advance against the settlement total, which meant that after the house sale he received considerably less than he had been expecting or planning around. Westbrook Kitchen was declared entirely separate property, supported by 8 years of clean incorporation records, 12 years of financial statements, and a clear legal structure that showed no overlap whatsoever with marital funds at any point in its history. Patrick's lawyer made one final attempt to argue that the business had benefited indirectly from the marriage because I had been able to focus on it while Patrick earned a salary that covered household expenses. The judge considered this briefly and dismissed it. Paula told me afterward, as we walked to our cars in the pale afternoon light, that in 20 years of family law practice, my documentation had been among the most thorough she had encountered. I told her I had learned from a good teacher. Patrick and Tanya moved into the Riverside apartment. Over the weeks that followed, news came back to me through mutual acquaintances, the way it always does in a city where people know people and cannot help passing information along. The apartment was smaller than Patrick had described it to Tanya in the months when everything was still a romantic possibility. His income no longer stretched across a shared household with 2 people contributing, went a shorter distance than he had expected. Tanya had certain expectations about what life with Patrick would look like, and Patrick had made certain promises in the easy confidence of a man who had not yet had to deliver on them. The distance between the promises and the reality became visible quite quickly. I did not follow this story closely. It was no longer part of my life, and I had no interest in measuring my recovery against his difficulties. But the news arrived anyway, the way it does, and I received it without pleasure and without surprise. People who build their plans on what they plan to take from someone else often find, when the taking does not go as expected, that there was less to stand on than they had thought. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I opened a second Westbrook kitchen location. I had been planning it carefully for nearly 2 years, well before any of this had happened, back when I was still telling myself that things at home were simply going through a difficult season. The new kitchen was situated in a commercial district 20 minutes from the first site, in an area with strong weekday corporate traffic and a gap in the market that I had identified over 18 months of quiet observation. I hired 4 new staff members and promoted Bev to operations director across both locations, a role she stepped into as though it had been built exactly for her. On the opening day, Nora came with an enormous bunch of flowers, and Patricia came with champagne, and my whole team had prepared enough food to feed everyone in the room twice over, and then some. I stood in that bright new kitchen, surrounded by people who had shown up simply because they wanted to celebrate something I had built, and something shifted quietly in my chest. Not triumph, which is too loud a word for what I felt. Something quieter and more lasting than that. Something that felt like arriving somewhere you had been walking toward for a long time without quite knowing it was there. Patrick called once, 4 months after everything was settled and done. I almost did not pick up. I looked at his name on the screen for 3 rings, and then I answered, because I had learned over a long life that the calls you avoid tend to cost you more energy than the ones you take. His voice was different from the voice I had known for 23 years, quieter, less certain at its edges. He said he had called to say he was sorry and that he meant it. I said I appreciated that. He said he had not understood until it was gone how much I had actually carried. I said no, he had not. There was a pause on the line, the kind of pause where a person is not sure if they have been forgiven or simply heard. He asked if the business was doing well. I told him it was doing very well, thank you. He said goodbye. I said goodbye. I have not heard from him since. I do not expect to. There is a particular kind of closed door that stays closed, not out of bitterness, but simply because what was behind it is fully finished, and I have learned to recognize the difference between the two. 1 year after that text message arrived, I received an invitation to speak at a Women in Business breakfast, hosted by the local Chamber of Commerce. The topic they had requested was building a resilient business. I stood at the front of that room with 47 women looking back at me, and I talked about foundations. I talked about the importance of keeping your business financially separate and legally protected from the very beginning, not as a sign of distrust, but as an act of respect for everything you have worked to build. I talked about the value of documentation, about knowing the exact legal structure of everything that belongs to you, about consulting professionals early rather than waiting until a crisis makes it urgent. I did not mention Patrick by name. I did not describe the divorce. I did not need to. 3 women came up to me privately after the room began to clear. Each of them said something close to the same thing in their own words. They said they had never thought carefully about protecting their business the way I described. I listened to each of them fully. Then I gave each one Paula's card and I said, start now. Not when you feel you need to. Now. Before you need to. The text message Patrick sent me at 11:47 on that Tuesday night is still on my phone. I have never deleted it. Not because reading it still hurts, because it does not, but because it is a useful reminder. It reminds me that the moment he believed he was closing a door on me was the very moment I had already finished building myself a new one. He moved $37,000 and thought he had left me with nothing. I had documentation, legal protection, a fully incorporated business, and 9 weeks of careful preparation. He sent a message at midnight, expecting to find me helpless and afraid. It found me at my kitchen table, reviewing the accounts of a business that had always been mine and that he had never once truly understood. Today, Westbrook Kitchen runs 2 locations with a third in planning. My team has grown to 15 people. My name is on the building and on the business and on the life I built, and it will stay there. My name is Claire Westbrook. I am 52 years old. I built something real. I protected it with everything I had, and when someone tried to take it from me, they discovered they were already 9 weeks too late.